going. I'll sit there. So, well, thank you for taking the time out this afternoon to join us for our presentation from URSA on mentoring. I gave a similar presentation like this back in the fall. We decided to do this one twice a year. There was pretty high demand for that fall seminar, and so it makes sense to do it again, especially since we have some summer project awards that are going to be out, and then the fall project award period will come out as well here. And I'll talk about those here in a second. So this by way of introductions. My name is Trent Sutton. I'm the director of URSA. I've been part of URSA now since January of 2015. I was co-director for about a year and a half. And then since July of 2016, I've been the director. And then with me today is Erin Kirchner. Erin is the URSA coordinator. Erin's in her first year still, so she's still kind of learning the ropes, but doing a wonderful job. And one thing that Erin will serve as, because when I put the presentation up, I can't see anything but the presentation. So Erin will be handling if you have any questions in the chat. And I want this to be interactive. So if you have questions, don't just wait till the end. You can ask questions as we go. Ask them in the chat. If you raise your hand, Erin will be able to see all that. I won't be able to see that, so she'll flag me on those kinds of things. So. But the plan for today, I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation. There we go, is to talk about mentoring and specifically mentoring of undergraduate research. And I'm going to talk about it from a very URSA-centric perspective because that's who I represent. But I think a lot of what I'll talk about today is generally applicable to any kind of undergraduate mentoring, undergraduate research, and creative scholarship. So the topics I wanted to hit are actually threefold. I want to first define how we in URSA define undergraduate research and creative activity. What does that mean? What are the components that we think about? I want to talk about the URSA related mentoring opportunities. So what are the funding RFPs that we have? A bit about our proposal process, just so people are clear on that. And if you're a mentor, what some of the options might be for you, and some other related things where you can play a role in mentoring undergraduates. And most of my time is going to be spent on this last area, talking about mentoring tips. And this isn't I would say this is not the be all end all. There's lots of things that go into this, but it's based on my experiences in two capacities. One is the URSA director. It's the observations that I've made over the years and working with students and mentors, and sort of in some cases having to deal with issues and problems that crop up. But also in my role, I've actually mentored a fair number of undergraduates over the years in various research projects. My background's in fisheries, and so we do a lot of research projects. And so I've got some experience directly working with students too. So that's the plan. And we'll start off with, how do we define research and creative activity? And with the URSA, how we define that is it's the process of developing new knowledge or creative products to answer questions or to provide solutions through active, inclusive participation and engaged mentorship in one's discipline or through interdisciplinary collaboration. So just a couple things that I want to point out there. This idea of developing new knowledge or creative products. Again, we're inclusive. We want all disciplines to participate in this. So STEM fields, you think about like scientific method and creating new knowledge that way. Creative products, arts and humanities, specifically writing, anything that a student might do to answer a question or provide a solution or develop something can be considered undergraduate research and or creative scholarship, creative activity. We use those terms kind of interchangeably. So basically anything a student can do falls under this umbrella of how we define undergraduate research and creative activity. Active, inclusive participation. Again, we want students to be directly engaged and involved in doing something specifically, but also this idea of engaged mentorship. And that's where all of you come in. And we define mentors, it have to be somebody from UAF, but faculty, staff, postdoc, graduate student. So it's pretty inclusive that way. The only group at UAF that cannot mentor an undergraduate is another undergraduate. That's the one criteria that we do have. And so we want that mentor to be involved. And I'll talk about ways to be involved, because there's lots of opportunities. And I sometimes think that sometimes my conversations with mentors is they don't always realize that. And that can come from proposal development to actually at the active project itself, to putting together final products, preparing for a research creative activity. All of those different things are areas where mentors can play a huge role in helping their student out as they're working through the project. And then the other thing I'll mention, in one's discipline or through interdisciplinary collaboration, the student doesn't have to do a project in their major. Students often do. I would say the majority of students do, but they can pick something altogether different in some other discipline entirely. So we've had STEM students do art projects, and art students and humanities students do STEM projects, and or some collaboration of those. We had some really interesting ones here more recently. With a STEM student doing an art project. It was a painting landscapes and taking a very scientific approach to that. So there's lots of ways to kind of blend projects. And so I think the take-home message here I want to leave you with is that anything a student can do at UAF can fall under this umbrella of creative activity or research, and sometimes blending those together. Some other criteria we think about that are important. One is time frame. Again, students can do individual projects. They can work in pairs. They can work in small groups. We have all of those that take place. But typically, as we define it, the project has to take place over a semester. So it's not like a graduate project where they might work on a year, for years in many cases. Now, students can do that, but we only fund typically a semester at a time, and students can only get usually one project award per academic year. But in the end, there's going to be some type of a final product, and that final product is defined by the student and the mentor. So sometimes that might be a poster or an oral presentation they give. It might be some actually tangible item that they're going to create. But that's something for the mentor and the student to work together on defining that. So there's got to be something in the end that the student is going to produce. That's going to be the final evaluation piece that comes out of that. So just some things to think a little bit about. When you start talking to undergraduates about how we define research and creative activity, and then how that is actually translated when it comes to producing anything. So before I sort of move on, are there any questions at this point? Good to go? Okay. As far as opportunities go, if you go to the URSA website, so if you Googled UAF URSA, you'll come to our website, lots of information there. I would encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't done so. One of the things you'll see is our award schedule. This is our award schedule for 2022, 2023. The various RFPs we have throughout the year, travel awards, the students can apply for travel awards to go to a meeting or an immersion, to give a presentation, to participate in some kind of activity. We have mentoring awards. So you as a mentor can apply for funding to support one or more students in a project, and those are much longer. Those are usually much longer projects than a typical student project, which is for the fall, spring, or summer session. We have community engaged learning awards. We're going to be rolling out a couple of new ones next year in the area of climate science, and also in the area of wellness and community and belonging. But most of our students apply for what I call the traditional student project award. So we have one for spring, fall, summer. Where we're at right now in our award cycle is we're down here. The students who applied for summer project awards submitted those. We sent those out for review. Those have been evaluated. Those scores have come back. We're actually about to make our funding decisions. Those will come out at the end of this week. We recently received our ITE Innovative Technology and Education Award proposals. Those are actually going to go out for review here pretty quickly, and then we'll be making a decision here within the next couple of weeks. So for the most part, we don't have a lot of opportunities left for this academic year. Actually, none for this academic year. The next RFPs that'll come out will be at the very end of the spring semester. Those will be due in the middle of the summer, and then we'll make decisions later on in the summer. That's for our fall project work. So that's next academic year. Like I said, we're going to roll out some new RFPs, requests for proposals from some other areas a little bit later, and we'll have our new award schedule as well. So take a look at that. You can get a lot more information on each one of those awards, and you can actually go to our award drop down to look at who we funded and what kinds of projects we funded in each of those different categories in the past. So I'm going to encourage you to do so if you're not familiar with URSA and has the projects we funded in the past. So lots of opportunities for funding. These different awards have variable amounts depending on the award and depending if it's one student versus multiple students. And so there's a lot of details there that would take the rest of my time if I went through all of that. But one thing that I want to point out is one of the things we have is a fair bit of money, and we like to give out money. And so I encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity, because we're often looking for more student proposals. I think one of the negative outcomes of the pandemic is that student and mentor engagement in URSA has kind of dipped a bit, and in part because there hasn't been as much activity on campus. There's really not as much one-on-one interaction between students and mentors. And we're starting to see a climb back out of that. So that means there's opportunities here. And again, I challenge all of you to take advantage of those opportunities. Some other areas that might be of interest to you, we do have some research-based courses, research and creative activity-based courses. So we have an URSA 388, which is a proposal development course. We have an URSA 488, which is actually a research course. The way we set these up, the students can enroll from anywhere from 1 to 6 credits for each one of those. And basically, we set them up. The student works with their mentor to again develop the proposal, which they might then submit for URSA funding. That's the expectation. Or they're actually, in most cases, most of what students enroll in is the URSA 488, which is the research course when they're doing it. Some disciplines have their own research course, and that's perfectly fine for the student to do that. And actually, in many cases, that serves as a capstone requirement for that program. Where our courses come in is if a student doesn't have that option within their degree program. So maybe they don't have a defined capstone, or there's nothing in there for research and or creative activity. We can play a role there. We provide that opportunity for students, and they can enroll and register for those credits there. We also have an MRAP program. That's the Museum Apprenticeship Program through the UA Museum of the North. That the faculty that work there are curators in a whole host of disciplines ranging from art to the various STEM-based sciences. And students can, especially if they're interested in doing sort of museum-related projects, or they're interested in being a curator down the road, they can apply to this apprenticeship program through either an MRAP 288 or 488. And work with a faculty mentor that way as well. So there are some options course-wise that students can work through us on. But again, in most cases, there's respective disciplines and degree programs have options as well. And then the last thing I'll mention before I go on to another topic, and this is coming up pretty quickly, and it's our big celebratory event each year, and that's RCA Day, Research and Creative Activity Day. This year, it's going to be on April 6th. So that's coming up in 2 weeks from this coming Thursday. In the past, it's always been on Tuesdays. We moved to a Thursday this year. The last couple of years, 2022, 2021, were virtual events because of the pandemic. 2020 was a canceled event because when the pandemic started, and we were planning on an in-person event, and everything kind of got shut down. So that got shut down too. So the last in-person event we've had for RCA Day was 2019. So we're pretty excited to get back in person. It's at the Wood Center. Students can start hanging their posters in the morning. The actual session, so poster session or any other creative displays that students have, will be from noon to 2. And the students will be expected to stand next to their poster, as you see here in these displays, or their creative display. Anybody can walk around and talk to them. So deans, other administrators, faculty, staff, students. It's a fun event, and then the deans evaluate the posters, and they come up with, in their respective college or school, the Dean's Choice Award winner, and then there's usually an honorable mention. And then we wrap up that session at 2:00. We break everything down. We reset up. We have an award ceremony at 4:00, and we present those awards. So I'll MC that event. Chancellor White will be there. Provost Prakash will be there. Vice Provost Fitz will be there. And then a whole host of other folks, all the deans and the student award winners. And we'll give them all a chance to kind of give a 1 to 2 minute sketch of their project that they worked on. So it's a fun event. It's a lot of work. Aaron's been working tirelessly preparing for this day. But it's definitely it's the capstone event for us, because it's a celebration of research and creative activity for undergraduates at UAF. And so if you haven't been to one of these events, I encourage you to come. If you've been to one of these events before, please come again. Bring some folks with you. We want this to be a big event. We have just over like 30 or so presenters, I believe, for that event. So a little bit smaller than the last time we had one of these, where we're pushing about 150. But again, the pandemic didn't do us any favor. So we're rebuilding that culture of participation. So hopefully I'll see you there. So April 6th, from noon to 2 will be the primary session where you can watch student presenters and learn about the work that they did. So any questions on any of those opportunities? So as a mentor, you have the opportunity to mentor a student in developing a proposal. You have the opportunity to mentor a student in the actual project itself, conducting the research or creative scholarship. You have a chance to mentor the student as they prepare their final product, again, a poster or some other creative display. You have the chance to mentor the student through this RCA Day activity or some other type of a presentation. So there's lots of opportunities to be involved with undergraduates. John, I see your hands up.
Thanks, Trent. I had two questions.
Sure.
One was about the courses that you teach, the 388 and the 488. I was just wondering, other than giving students a space to have credits if they don't have them in their department, is there any instruction or like meeting times or anything that students have, or is it mostly kind of working on their project independently? How do those, and are they different between 388 and 488? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah. So the difference between the two is 388 is a proposal development course, and 488 is the actual research. So they're actually conducting the project. So they've already gotten a proposal funded, or they're doing some type of activity, right? They've developed a proposal probably, and they're doing the actual work now. These are not courses in the sense of me giving any type of instruction. These are courses that they're basically credit shells where the student can then conduct the proposal development or conduct the actual project. I serve as the instructor of record because they're URSA classes, but I don't actually do any instruction, and I play very little role in this process. It's usually the two individuals who are working on it is the student and the mentor. So say, for example, John, I'm just going to use you since you asked the question. Say you had a student that you'd agreed to mentor in an URSA 488 project of some sort, and they're taking it for 4 credits. The expectation is they work 3 hours per credit, so 12 hours a week, roughly, on that. And so you would be working directly with the student during that semester. Say it was during the spring semester, from the start till the end of the semester, working with that student on a weekly basis as they're completing their project. And then at the very end, you're going to give them some type of an evaluation, a grade on the final product from that project that's been agreed upon between you and the student. And then you're going to give me the grade, and I enter it in the system, and then that's it. So my role is really to helping to set it up. And so the things I ask for everybody is, I need to have the proposal that the student is planning to work on, if it's a research project or a creative activity, or in the case of proposal development, what they're planning on developing. And then I also need to have how many credits the student is planning on enrolling for, what their plan is as far as the activity. And then I need a confirmation from the mentor, like that they've agreed to work with the student, and they're going to serve as a mentor for the entire semester working with that student.
Thanks, Trent. That helps a lot. And then my other question was about online students. So do you allow online students to participate in the student proposal, like the project proposals, or are there, I guess, among your kind of list of funding opportunities, which ones can online students do and which ones can't they do? If that's
yeah, they can do any of them. We, especially during the pandemic, that's how students were working with their mentors, was remotely, because we couldn't often be in the same room together. And so virtually is a way to do this as well. So we don't say you can't do that. It really, some projects lend themselves better to that than others. Right. So it's on a case by case basis, but absolutely any one of those can work that way. Mm-hmm. If the project is appropriate for that, that's that makes the most sense. But certainly, one of the expectations we have, and I'll talk about this when we talk about expectations here in a minute, is the student and the mentor have to interact in some way. And that might be face-to-face, it might be email, phone, it might be by Zoom, like we're doing right here, right now, which is virtual. So the interactions can take place in a number of different ways. Again, it depends on what's appropriate for that relationship in that project, and where the student's at relative to where the mentor's at too.
And sorry, one last one, kind of building on that one. If they can do it, which it sounds like they can, if students aren't in Fairbanks, how would they present at the creative activities, research and creative activities day? And that's end of my questions.
Yeah, we haven't had to cross that road yet. So the last 2 years we did a strictly virtual event. So everyone was on the same playing field there. We all did it by Zoom. It was pretty straightforward. We haven't had to do what I would call a blended event yet, where we have, say, some of our students here in Fairbanks and then others that are somewhere else. At least I don't think, Aaron, we don't have that this year, right? I don't recall that
We don't have that this year, but we do have Research and Creative Activity Day products in both places. So there are students who will be in person presenting their poster. If it was a virtual student, we would still print their poster and hang it, but there's also an element where we have it on our website. And the poster, the abstract, the poster presentation is also included there. So there's a way that this could possibly move into a blended if we get more virtual interest. Right now, most of our students are on the Fairbanks campus, so that hasn't been a concern yet.
I could envision a scenario, and maybe this happens down the road, especially as we're trying to get more students engaged from the rural campuses. But one scenario I could see is maybe if a student was in a location where they couldn't be in Fairbanks, whatever reason, and for RCA Day, and we could set up a laptop next to a poster or their creative display and have them connect by Zoom. And they're sort of sitting there virtually on Zoom. So basically it's a head on a screen, on a laptop screen, but they could interact with people that are there. That might be something we consider in the future. We haven't gotten there yet, or hasn't been a request yet.
Would a travel award also be an option for students who are working remotely?
Sure.
For RCA Day to present?
Yeah, we could consider that. Certainly. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Because the travel award is to go to in the most basic sense, especially for like somebody's giving a presentation, like either poster or oral, you're traveling to a meeting, right? You're traveling to a meeting to give that presentation. RCA Day, technically, in its very basic form, is a meeting of sorts. So absolutely. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Where are we at? Okay. A couple things I want to mention. I mentioned opportunities for you to mentor students. And one of those areas and most common area is to help the student develop their proposal. So you've agreed. So as an example, you've agreed to mentor a student in a project. And so they're going to have, if they're going to apply for URSA funding, they could apply for BLAST funding, they could apply for funding from some other source, but they're going to apply for funding. For URSA, the way that works is the mentor plays a role in that process. You don't write the proposal for the student, you help the student in that process. And I want to provide some background on how we operate, just so you know, for when you get to that point in time. So as I mentioned, we went through a minute ago, we have a lot of different RFPs throughout the year. There's sort of, and we have those dates always listed. We'll set up our schedule for next academic year over the summer. And we'll get that posted so that you know that is sometime this summer. And you can kind of look at it and kind of plan accordingly if you're wanting to mentor a student, or sometimes the student just contacts you and that's where the relationship begins. But just to point out a few things, it hasn't been this way lately, but we have had as many as 70 proposals per RFP. That's like once or twice, not very often, but it's more like 15 to 20 is a little more common number. My point is, it's competitive. Not everybody gets funded. We did have a limitation on how much money we have. And so we can't fund everybody. So again, working with the student as they develop the proposal is really important, because like I said, we're not going to fund everybody. It's the best proposals are the ones that are going to get funded. Usually when we're awarding, we're giving out the awards, funding the proposals, we're funding somewhere between 8 to 12 proposals per RFP. It can be a little bit plus, can be a little bit minus. It sort of depends. We look at how much money we have versus how much is being requested. We look at the rankings, and I'll talk about that here in a second, and we make our decisions. Sometimes we actually will fund more than we actually planned because there's some really good projects. Sometimes we might fund a little bit less than what we planned because the projects maybe aren't quite so don't meet our expectations. And so that can vary a little bit, but that's just kind of I just want to give you a bit of a ballpark on what to expect. The way it happens is when a student or a mentor submits a proposal, we collect all of those at the deadline. Aaron gets all those together. We do some basic checking to make sure the minimal requirements are being met. And sometimes we have to disqualify proposals at that stage because they don't meet the requirements. Like a student's GPA is too low, as an example. Like we have a minimum 2.3 GPA. If a student has below that, we're not going to consider it. Just those basic types of things. But once we have all the proposals, we know they're going to be sent out for review. We have a review panel, a faculty review panel. We send those out to, or a review board. For each proposal gets reviewed by 4 faculty. So there's 4 reviews that come in. We try to set that up to be across disciplines so that, as an example, what's not going to happen in most cases, we can't expect that a project in biology is only going to be reviewed by biology faculty, because we might not have that many biology faculty in any given RFP that want to serve as reviewers. And so what we try to set up is that it's a pretty cross mix of faculty reviewers per proposal. But the way we usually want it set up is that for each project, regardless if it's a STEM-based project or an arts and humanities project, they're going to get 2 STEM reviewers and you're going to get 2 arts and humanities reviewers. And we work really hard to make that happen, so it's balanced in that way. We give the reviewers a scoring rubric, and you can take a look at that, those criteria on our website. They sort of go through it and they evaluate the proposal based on the various components. It's golf, it's low score wins, it's not football, right? It's not the high score. So you want to get low scores on each of those different components. So making sure that the student and or you, if you're submitting a mentor proposal, meet all of the criteria that are expected. So they score it, and then they provide some written comments. Those written comments are important because we want to give that feedback, because, like I said, not everybody's going to get funded. But if somebody doesn't get funded, we recommend that they address the concerns from the written comments from the reviewers, and then resubmit the next time that's appropriate. And when students or mentors do that, their probability of getting funded the next time is much greater. And so we don't want to just be like, oh, you don't get funded, you're out, that's it, it's over, can't do it. No, we want the students and mentors to, do a little more work, make the revision, resubmit a little bit later. But based on those scores that we get back, we give the reviewers a couple of weeks. We compile the scores. Aaron does that, puts it in the spreadsheet, and then we look at the rankings, and then we go through that, and then we sort of work our way down the rankings until we run out of money, basically, for that particular RFP, and then we make our awards, and then that's it for that particular RFP. But some things looking at and having reviewed what might actually be thousands of proposals at this point in time. I play an active role in that review process. I don't review any proposals from my college. I'm in the College of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences. I don't want there to be any conflict of interest there. I only review other programs. But some things I see that happen that might limit funding success, and one of those I would say is making sure that all the different proposal components are addressed thoroughly. All of our criteria, so whether it's the abstract or the background or the objectives or the design or whatever it might be, have a word limit to it. So taking advantage of that, I mean, you can't go over the word limit, certainly, but I've seen many cases where for a section, it might be like 1 or 2 sentences that somebody provides, and that's usually not adequate. It's got to be, using all the words is kind of important to make sure you describe what needs to be described. The one area that I see most commonly where students, especially mentors as well, get dinged pretty good is the mentor plan. And I'm going to talk a lot about the mentor plan here today, because that's the critical thing. That's where, when problems happen, is because of that. And I'll elaborate on that here in a moment. Spending some time looking at the evaluation criteria on our website is key. Again, so where we're coming from, how we're going to look at this, and making sure that as you've written the proposal or the student's written the proposal, those criteria are being addressed. Writing for a general audience, like I mentioned, the review panel for every proposal is going to get 2 STEM and 2 non-STEM reviewers. So I'm just making this up, say you're you're an engineer and you're writing an engineer proposal, the student's writing an engineering proposal, recognizing that some of your reviewers are not going to be engineers. And maybe none of your reviewers are going to be engineers. So if you use highly technical language and jargon that only engineers, only mechanical engineers or environmental engineers or electrical engineers understand, but somebody who's not an engineer doesn't, probably not going to get a good score in that. So making sure that you or the student has written this in a language that, regardless of discipline, is understandable. That's really key, because if someone can't understand it, they're not going to give a good score. And like I mentioned, using that feedback, revising the proposal. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody afterwards, or Aaron as well. And sometimes, students and mentors do contact us, and we have those conversations. We want to see projects get funded. I mean, that's no other way around this. And so, the more we can help you out, the better off, that relationship is. And so, use us as a resource to help you improve the proposal, so that whether you and the student submit it the next time around, the probability of funding is going to be much greater. So those are some basic feedback and comments that I have about the proposal process and some basic aspects. But like I said, that proposal development process is really a key mentoring area. And I can't emphasize that enough, because I've actually had many mentors, more than I wish to admit, have told me they didn't view the proposal development from the student perspective as something they should be involved in. And I told them they're dead wrong on that. The mentor should be absolutely involved in proposal development, but with the student. I don't want the mentor to write it for them. That's not what we're looking for. But the student writes the section or the whole thing, and then provides some critical feedback and helping them to improve that. And so you're helping sort of train them on how to write a proposal and how to be successful in writing a proposal. And I think that's a key thing that all students can use that support for. Okay. Any questions before we get into the mentoring aspect? Okay. So I'm going to go through a series of 6 tips that I, again, have gleaned over my years as a mentor and also shepherding this URSA director process. And the first, and they're all important, but this first one is, I would say, most important. And it's the one that if I had to go to Vegas and lay some money on, like, where something's going to go wrong, this is the one. Like, this is the one that's going to be the problem. And that's defining clear expectations with your mentee. And what I mean by that, in its most basic sense, is making sure that you and your mentee are on the same page from day one and continuing through the entire process. We've seen lots of instances where that's not the case, and we're doing some things I'll talk about here in a moment to rectify that. But a little more specifically, what do I mean by that? Some basic questions you should ask, or the student should ask, is first off, what does the mentor expect of the student? What do you as a mentor expect of the student? And vice versa, what should the student expect of the mentor? Having that conversation very early on, before the project is started, is key. If those expectations are out of whack and out of line, the probability of having a problem is very high. When you're both sort of lockstep at that beginning and staying lockstep in expectations all the way through, that's where we see success. And so that requires communication. We'll talk about communication in a second, but making sure the expectations are aligned from the word go is critical. Some other things that go along with that. How many hours a week should you expect the student to work on the project? We have some basic guidelines for students that enroll for credit, like the URSA 388 or 488. It's 3 hours for every credit. But every project's a little bit different. So, and also I recognize that projects sort of ebb and flow over time, right? So there are times when projects are really engaged. There's times when they maybe not be, and that may be because of the nature of the project, might be because of the student's schedule, and because of your schedule. But laying all that out up front, and that's where this mentor plan comes in, I'll talk about here in a minute, is really key. So the student knows, okay, I'm expected that this week I need to put in 10 hours in the lab because things are happening, or in the studio because things are happening, whatever it might be. Next week's going to be a bit lighter. We're just kind of waiting for the experiment to sort of develop or whatever's happening there. We're expecting, we're waiting for something to dry, whatever. So that cycle is something that needs to be articulated up front so that everyone's clear on what the expectations are. What's the best way for the student to contact the mentor with questions? Do you want them to shoot you emails? Do you want them to just drop by your office, whatever? Do you want them to call you? What is the platform you want to receive information from the student? How should they get a hold of you? Everybody's different, right? How students want to contact their mentors, how mentors want to be contacted. And so whatever is right for you and your mentor is something, or mentee, just work that out, talk about it. How often will the student meet with you as a mentor? This is something that goes in the mentor plan, something we want to see in the proposal. Is it weekly? Is it every other week? Is it multiple times a week? Again, recognizing that every project's a little bit different, every relationship's a little bit different. So what you might set up with your student might be different than somebody else's with their student, or what you might do with another student, depending on that project and that student. So there's no right or wrong here, but there has to be a plan. And weekly or at least every other week meetings are sort of the norm. In addition to that, what do you want the student to do to prepare for those meetings? You just want them to show up? Is that adequate? Do you want them to have something prepared? Are you wanting them to go over something specific? Every meeting should end with, here's what we're going to talk about the next meeting. And here's how I need you to prepare. And also, likewise, you as a mentor, I need to prepare something as well. So that kind of planning is key as well. This next one I say is if applicable, because it's not always applicable, but when should the student get help from a graduate student mentor, and when should they contact a faculty member? So this happens quite often where there's lab groups. So there's a faculty mentor, and they might have one or more graduate students, and then there's one or more undergraduates who work in the laboratory. And so say one of those undergraduates is conducting an URSA project. And when should that student come to you as a mentor, and when should they go to a grad student as a mentor? We've had that confusion happen before, where the student doesn't know who to talk to and when. Laying that out, and so the student knows the communication roles and the hierarchy and how that all works together is really important, because they often don't really understand that. And so that way the student is like, I don't know who to go to. I'm not going to go to anybody. And then that's where problems start to pop in. And so again, having those conversations with you, the grad student, and the undergraduate to sort of line all that out so they know who's their go-to and when is really important. Should the student send the mentor periodic email updates on the progress of the project? What information should be included in those updates? So maybe you're going to meet weekly, or maybe you're going to meet every other week. Do you want the student to do more frequent check-ins with you? And if so, how should they do that? Email, or just pop by, or you're gonna contact them? And what do you want in that? You just want updates, how are things going? What are the problems? What can I do to help you? Again, these are just laying out expectations, so everyone's on the same page from day one on what's expected of both sides, mentor and mentee. And so what we've developed, and something new we're rolling out for this year, we've not done this before, is what we're calling a mentor plan, or a mentee mentor plan, or undergraduate research contract, where a lot of this information that I'm talking about today in this section is in there that we want you to fill out. And this is something that's going to be done at the beginning of the project before it actually started. And it's the idea to get this communication started so that the advisor or the mentor and the mentee are on the same page. Because like I said, this is where I've seen the most problems pop up over the years, is when there's a mismatch there. And not pointing fingers at one versus the other. There's just a communication mismatch that the student thinks you're getting something that the mentor is not providing. The mentor thinks you're getting something out of the student that the student's not providing, or some combination of the two. And then the relationship kind of goes south. And we're trying to prevent that from happening, or diagnose this as it's happening, so that we can resolve it in a productive way for both the mentor and the mentee. So we've actually vetted that document through our advisory board, and we're going to require that as our expectation moving forward for all mentor-mentee relationships. And that's available on our website as well, and you can take a look at that. Moving on to our second mentoring tip: make the steps of the research or creative scholarship process explicit. And what I mean by that is remember that you're working with a student, an undergraduate, who probably has never done a project before. They've never been involved in some type of STEM-based research project. They've never been involved in some kind of creative display or activity development. You, as the expert in your area, have done this before. You've mentored other students perhaps before. You certainly have knowledge that they don't have, because you're further along in this in the process than they are. But think about, what do they need to know? What background knowledge? So they might be providing them some readings. What skill sets do they know? They might need some training. And being aware that you as a mentor, you either need to provide that to them, or maybe you have, again, graduate students or technicians that are going to provide that to them, or somebody else is going to do that. But you need to think about that all up front, because you just can't expect the student to know they have to do certain things, or that if they have to use a piece of equipment or learn a certain technique, they might not be able to learn that by reading a manual. They might actually need somebody to physically be in the room with them, showing them how to do this. And so making sure that they are aware of this, you're aware of this, and that's all lined out is really important, because, and this is true, small gaps in knowledge can create big obstacles for students. And I've seen students where students feel like they should know something, but they don't, and they're reluctant to go talk to their mentor because they might feel like they failed in some way, or they're not good enough to do this. They lack the confidence. And so that becomes a barrier to them being successful, and increases the probability of stop out. And that's something nobody wants to have happen. We've had that happen. We have seen that happen this past year, as a matter of fact. And so, again, that's part of this being upfront, being communicative, and laying everything out clearly from day one is really, really key here. So one of the expectations that we have in our mentoring plan is that you're going to come up with a series of milestones and deadlines with the student. This is a group project here. You and the mentee are working together, or maybe other mentors and other students are working together on this, but you're laying out the timeline and the milestones and the deadlines for each of the various steps of the project. Now, I understand that sometimes, a lot of projects, there's kind of they're not that well structured. They're not that where, each week what's going to happen. But in general, the general process and progress and chronology that goes along with that is key to sort of lay that all out, so it's clear for the student and what they need to know at each of the different steps. If you're doing a laboratory experiment and you're doing some kind of following a protocol, they need to know certain things at different points in time. They need to have certain skills built up as they go. That's the type of thing we're talking about here. So having that conversation with the student in terms of what they need to know, what skills they need to have in their tool bag, so they can actually go and complete this each step of the way. And that's clear and explicit. You can't expect the student just to know that. What you might expect a grad student to know, don't expect an undergraduate to know that, because that's not necessarily going to be that's not a good expectation to have. Let's put it that way. Make sure you set clear deadlines. Again, that's part of that timeline, that part of that mentor plan, so that when certain steps are going to happen, the student knows when these steps are going to happen, they can complete them as they go along. Make sure you're constantly assessing your student, and that's certainly their beginning skill level and knowledge, but also as they work their way through as well. Making sure that your mentee is able to complete tasks or demonstrate knowledge is really key. And I'll come back to that here in a second. But, I think the old adage, you don't know what you don't know, is really true here. An undergrad student might think they know what's going on, but they often don't know, because they haven't been through the process before. And so they don't know what they don't know. But you, as the mentor, do know what they don't know. And so there's where you come in, right? That's where you can play a role. And there's different ways you can do that, through conversation or having them do outside work. And that's not which approach you take is very style based and very one-on-one and based on the individual and the project and all that. But there's definitely opportunities here to sort of figure that out. But making sure that if you identify, okay, the student doesn't really understand this process, like, you need to make sure that they're clear on that up front and go through that with them. And so one of the ways to do that, and one of my favorite ways to do that, is to have the conversation with the student, to kind of lay it all out and explain it all to them thoroughly. And again, maybe you have them do some outside readings in advance of that, so you can have a conversation with them, but then ask them to restate what they need to do to you. So basically, you're going to sit there and listen, and they're going to basically explain it to you. And in a sense, they are teaching. We all know that as instructors and teachers, the best way to learn something is actually have to teach it. And this is another way to do this. It's a technique to have the student relay this to you, and then you listen, and then you can identify how well they did understand that process. And if there's an area where there's not very well defined or there's very unclear, that's where okay, here's where they need some more work. Here's where we need to have additional conversation, additional reading. They need more experience. They need to learn additional skills. And so you can help identify, what parts of the process are potential stumbling blocks because the student doesn't necessarily understand it. That's not a bad thing. This is helping them to be successful. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Another thing that I've asked my students to do over the years is, for those who have completed projects with me, asking them, now that you're at the end or you've completed a project, if you had to go back in time, what would you tell yourself on day one? What types of things do you wish you would have known on day one or week one or month one or whatever it might be? And sort of collecting that information and then using that is a sort of springboard to provide your mentees with that information as well. So that's really important thing to keep in mind. Again, you're trying to help your mentee be successful. Tip number 3, don't assume that students understand everything that you say. Students will often nod along like, yeah, they get it. And maybe they do at the time, but sometimes they don't. But maybe they think they do, and then they really don't. Again, that's where kind of some things we just talked about, again, providing background readings or other things they can do or other opportunities to help them understand the process they're going to go through. Just giving space in your meetings with students to let them ask questions and making them understand that it's okay to ask questions. They feel it should be a safe space to ask questions. They should be comfortable asking questions. That's where you're developing a relationship, so they feel like they can, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Anything is valid here. And you want them to get it all out so that you can make sure they are going to be successful. Make sure there are again, checks along the way for understanding that the student knows what they're doing. The expectation that you're going to be in the lab 100% of the time with the student. They're going to have some independent time as well. Certainly having the student, you might have your weekly meetings or your every other week meetings that are sit downs, maybe for an hour. Maybe you're going to have the student email you every 3 days or every 4 days to kind of give an update, but you should also reach out too and reach out to the student and say, how's it going? I haven't seen you in a day or two. Just want to check in. Everything going okay? Any problems? Anything I can do? Anything you need? Those are important. The student wants to know that you care about them too. And so those kind of check-ins are really important. Don't assume that if students aren't asking questions, that means everything's fine. I think it's a very invalid assumption to make. And again, I think a key thing for any mentor is being able to diagnose when things are beginning to go wrong, not after they've gone wrong. It's easy at that point often to pick it out, but trying to see, okay, things are we're starting to get off the rails here a little bit. Let's have a little bit of a check back to make sure that, maybe there's a misunderstanding of some sort. Maybe something the student thought they understood something. Maybe I didn't explain it correctly. So you can catch those things before they sort of snowball into something much bigger. Mistakes are going to happen. I'll come back to that in a second because mistakes will happen. But you're trying to prevent that and sort of minimize that as much as you possibly can. So things you can do, you can have your student sort of write up what they're going to do, write up the steps in the experiment, write up the steps in the design process. If they're going to be putting together some type of a product, they're going to be creating some type of a metalsmithing display, or they're going to put together some kind of a drawing or painting, or they're doing a ceramic sculpture project of some sort, and they need to make some kind of a glaze. Like, what are all the steps in the process? And then you can sort of look at that and say, okay, you've missed a step here. Like, if you don't do this, then this whole thing's not going to work. So catching those types of things, and you review that and provide that critical feedback. That's mentoring. Again, asking your students to give you updates. That can be email, face-to-face, however you do that. Some kind of a summary of what they learned. What are their obstacles? What are their plans for the next week? Again, you're establishing communication. And sometimes in the case of undergraduate research and creative activity, for that time you're mentoring the student, it can be more intensive than actually working with a graduate student. Because you do often expect a little more independence often with graduate students, certainly PhD relative to the master's, but undergraduates, there's a lot of engagement with a mentor and the student and expectation of one-on-one interaction. So definitely keep that in mind and plan for that when you're going to be working with the student. again, having the student explain their research to people outside their field, having the student explain their research with peers in the field, that can be other grad students, other lab mates, technicians, other faculty and staff in your area, are really important, because again, the idea here is we want to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of what's going on here. And again, that helps by listening to them, helps identify when maybe a student doesn't understand something fully. And so then you can provide that additional information will help them be successful. Number 4, I'm going to sort of kind of plow through these because we're going to run out of time if I don't. Number 4 is be encouraging and supportive, even if a mistake is made. Mistakes are going to happen, guaranteed. This is going to happen along the way. And so for you as the mentor, the opportunity here is to discuss what led to that error or mistake or whatever happened, and then how do you fix it? How do you correct it? I think it's a key aspect. We learn often a lot from the things we do wrong, often more than maybe sometimes when we do things correctly. So this is going to teach students resilience. For some of these students, this might actually be the first time they've actually really maybe made a major mistake or maybe failed at something. That's a great learning opportunity. I actually had a student one time who was a superstar student coming out of high school, graduated from UAF in 2.5 years. Did a undergraduate research project that at the beginning kind of was a series of bungles, to put it mildly. And the student was really frustrated by that. It was the first time that she had ever had something not go as planned. And I thought it was great. I thought not that because I want to see the student have to suffer through it, because I thought the student learned a lot about how to do it and do it the right way. And it was a great learning experience for her. I mean, there's a lot of conversation that went into that and training that went into that to help resolve that issue. But in the end, I think the outcome was better than if things had just worked perfectly from the beginning, and the students sort of smoothing went through the project. It was a great learning experience. And I think that those kind of setbacks and how to recover from that, because it happens to all of us in any kind of project, and kind of learning how to work through that is really important. So, explaining hurdles and when hypotheses don't work, and the dead ends or rabbit holes are just a normal part of the process. I always tell students that science or creative display is kind of like making sausage. It's really messy and ugly during the process, but the end product is nice. And so that all is messy along the way. And so, having students work through that process is key. Learning from setbacks and how that informs future work is really important. And then you as a mentor serve as a model for how to handle when things don't go right. Don't go kicking garbage cans and things like that when a project doesn't go the right way. It's just part of what we do. We just have to, something doesn't work right, an experiment doesn't work right, a glaze doesn't work right. You're making revisions to some sort of written piece, whatever it might be. Is learning from those mistakes and those things that went wrong, making revisions, and then moving forward. And then that's how progress is made. So again, another thing here is to review your communication plan with the student. Again, maybe this could have been caught a little bit sooner. Maybe you weren't communicating enough at this particular stage of the game for this particular project. So maybe having more frequent communication is going to be important to help address these things early on. But also giving the student positive feedback. Things are going well, even though this particular stage didn't work well. They're still doing a great job. Just keep it up, keep your head up, keep your confidence. And that's something that is really important, because I think one of the things I've seen from students, and hear this quite a bit, is that one of the things they get out of completing a project is a lot of confidence, a lot of self-confidence. And so if they're feeling like they're just sort of bungling through this and it's not going well, they're going to lose confidence. And so making sure you kind of maybe serve as a bit of a cheerleader at times to help them with that is important. Being honest, constructive criticism, not destructive criticism, is really key here. Number 5, provide opportunities for greater responsibilities. Again, this may or may not be something you do with the student depending on where they're at, but definitely providing that opportunity if they're sort of progressively doing well and becoming more proficient. So again, we want to see our students develop independence. We recognize that often that undergraduates need a lot of support to begin with, but that over time, as they become more confident and the project begins to go sort of continues to advance, they take more ownership, they become more independent. And working through that project, that some students really kind of sort of thrive in those environments. And so kind of learning like how much engagement do you have to have, and how much can you give that student some leeway to kind of continue to work on a project is key. And again, that's a case by case basis. There's no one size fits all there. Depends on the student, depends on the project. So some questions I pose here: where does the student continue to need support? Where does he or she seem ready for a challenge? Again, case by case basis. What is the student's career plans? How much time do they have to work on the project? And so what is something realistic and meaningful that they can sort of take on as far as independence during that time frame that they have to work on the project? Thinking about sort of their career goals, what are the next steps in helping that student achieve their career goals? What skills they need to learn, what knowledge they need to develop along the way, and how can you provide that with them so they can continue to grow and develop as they work through this? So those are all some things, again, that happen on a case-by-case basis. And then the last thing I'll mention here, and then I'll wrap it up, and we might have a time for a few questions, is some last aspects that I think are really important related to both professional and personal development and growth for students, providing networking opportunities. And that's where we can come in, because we have travel awards that we can provide for students to go to meetings and give their presentations, or participate in some type of an immersion and then meet other professionals in that area, and that can lead to jobs in graduate school, et cetera. How to work in a professional setting, right? There are norms that we all have in our respective disciplines that we have to follow. You're helping to train the students so they know what those norms are in the laboratory, in a studio, in the field, whatever it might be. Gaining experience in communication. I don't think anybody's perfect at written and or oral communication, especially students. They all need they need guidance and experience there. And so providing that opportunity for them is key. And then I mentioned some of these other areas, like it helps students develop self-confidence, critical thinking, leadership. Those are all great and tangible skills that students need. And those are the things we hear from students in their self-reflections at the end of projects. They entered this project, they weren't sure if they could actually accomplish it, but they gained a lot of confidence along the way, helped develop their critical thinking skills, helped develop their communication skills. And then they felt like, oh, you know what? I completed undergraduate research. Now I can go on and get a master's degree. I can go on and get a PhD or whatever, professional school, whatever it might be. They didn't think that before. So there's a lot of other skills that come out of these projects outside of the immediate discipline the student is in that are really essential for their personal growth or professional growth. So just to kind of wrap it up, some things about mentoring. Again, this communication and clear expectations from day one is really key. Hopefully that is an overarching theme that comes out of this. Having those conversations. Again, the process we're going to implement here for URSA moving forward is requiring the mentor and mentee to have this expectations document completed and discussed before we let them start on the project. That planning is a key part of this, and sort of spelling this out all the way through and making the student has the skills and knowledge to accomplish all the various tasks so that their probability of success is much greater than if you don't have these things lined out. So with that, I've got a couple of minutes, not much time, but any questions? And by the way, here's the URSA website. Here's my contact information. There's Aaron's contact information. The URSA office is in 301 Bunnell. If you've never been down there, that's where Aaron is located. My office is actually up on West Ridge in Arctic Health Research Building. I'm down there periodically, but you can always come by my office and see me there as well. I'm more than happy to chat. But any questions before we adjourn for the day?
So I don't have any questions in the chat, but we did have a really good comment from Nicola, who said allowing the student to speak is very important. Giving them the opportunity to talk, explain their perspectives, and reach a solution themselves is a great way to facilitate mentoring. We are there for guidance. So I thought that was really good.
Fully agree with that.
Share
Great
there.
statement. Yeah. Well, again, thanks everybody for the time. This recording we posted on the URSA website. So if you want to go back and view any of it again, you certainly can. Or if you want to pass this along to a colleague or somebody else, we'll do this again in the fall. Like I said, we're really trying to sort of work on this mentor-mentee relationship, and that's a big focus moving forward for us. And so hopefully some of this hopefully this all makes sense and is something that you're supportive of. And like I said, you feel free to reach out to either Aaron or myself, and we're more than happy to chat more about this. And again, don't forget about Research and Creative Activity Day, April 6th, coming up in a little over a week and a half away. Hopefully I'll see some of you there. So with that, thank you for your time, and we'll see you hopefully in a couple weeks.